You know, we sat down in a diner and we were talking, and you were the sheriff of this giant county that's almost the size of a state for a lot of people. And you gave me a book that I, at first, was kind of looking over my shoulder being like, I don't think you're supposed to like this book. And it was How to Win Friends and Influence People. And you gave it to me and you said, this is an important thing you should read. So I did. And you were exactly right. This book that's been maligned by a lot of people made a huge impact on me. And I'm so grateful you gave me that book.
Well, you're very welcome. I wish it had a different title because it certainly turns people off. But in my career, I've given away, I'm just going to guess, 120, 125. I was originally given the book when I was 14 years old by a very influential aunt of mine who's a self-made millionaire, and she was a college professor, and she was one that told me when I was like 12, if I ever catch you smoking, I'm going to beat your butt. And so I've never tried a cigarette in my life because of Aunt Betty. I have this huge amount of respect for her. She's 87 years old now, and she's still very influential in my life. But I read the book when I was 14. I read it once a year. And it's not what the name implies. It's not a manipulator book. It's not a book that tells you how to make people do something they don't want to do. It's not it at all. What it is, it's a book of communication. It's a book of how you can better communicate to others, as well as hear, and even more important, hear what the other person has to communicate to you and listen to them. And the dynamics of a good conversation, if somebody studies the dynamics of a good conversation, it involves two people who are active listeners and who may actually appreciate the other perspective and maybe even change their perspective. You know, I jokingly say I've been married 35 years and I'm used to being wrong. But there's a lot of truth to that, because if you actively listen to the other person and you have some respect for that other person, chances are they're going to make an impact in the way that you think. You know, they're going to have some kind of influence in your thought process. And you don't have to say it right there and say, gosh, I'm going to change my mind. But when you walk away from the conversation and you replay it in your head, that we all do, we all replay conversations, you go, you know, that makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate where that person's coming from. And in today's crazy world of everything that's happening on a social front, you know, whether it's the defund the police, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's the election, all these major social issues are coming up on our radar. And if somebody doesn't listen to the other side, they just need to stay at their house and not say a word, because we have to start communicating. And communicating means listening. It doesn't mean talking. In the chapter in the book, Vance, which is my favorite chapter, is how to be a great conversationalist. And by reading the chapter, by reading the title, you might say, well, gosh, this is going to teach me how to talk to people. And that's not what the chapter is about. The chapter is how to be a very active listener, allow the other person to do most of the talking. And chances are, when you and that person part ways, that other person's going to say, boy, he was a great conversationalist, even though the truth is they did most of the talking.
Yeah, I have a friend named Joseph Ring who really crystallized exactly what that chapter is about. Is people don't remember what you told them. They remember what they told you, right? They have this feeling of like, I got to share this thing with this other person and they listened and I felt heard. And we go through so much of our lives never feeling heard, that if somebody ever sits across from us and says, oh, I never thought about that, you have this connection with them that's just different. And I think you're right. In today's day and age, we have so much of on the social media, when you're not having two people in front of each other, there's much more of an honor culture of I'm going to destroy you so that way I can win, that you don't have when you're in a general conversation. When you and I are talking, if I only shove great ideas towards you, it doesn't matter how great the ideas are. If you don't feel heard, you don't care what I have to say.
Well, one of the things that we as humans have a fault of is we are so individually engaged in thinking of our next statement or our next question of what we're going to say in a conversation that we literally do not hear what the other person's saying, because the other person will say something which triggers a thought, and you say, well, I'm going to ask them about this as soon as it's my turn to ask the question. And then the rest of that question or conversation you don't even hear because you're ready to pounce. And so when I talk to people, you may even hear me have a pause between when you end and when I begin, because I don't want to steal 10% of your sentence by jumping in at the end of it and telling you what I thought. So, I mean, we can have this conversation back and forth. You and I are both polite people, but if there's one takeaway from the book, I would like people to have is how to be a great conversationalist. And that means how to listen. Let me give you one quick example, Vance. How many times have you introduced yourself to a person and they've said their name, and about 2 seconds later, you go, what in the hell is that person's name? Because I know that you said it, but for the life of me, I can't remember what this person's name is. Has that ever happened?
Oh, I mean, 99% of every time you introduce yourself.
So the book tells us, and this podcast isn't a great, it isn't trying to be a segue to make the Carnegies even more money because the Carnegie wrote the book. But the reason it happens is we in our mind are so impassioned to impress that other person on anything that we don't even hear their name. I mean, they could say their name's Donald Duck, and we're not even going to hear that because we're so busy wondering, are my shoes tied? Is my zipper up? Is my hair combed? Is my shirt buttoned? We're wondering about all these things in our own personal life, and we do not hear that other person. So when that other person says, hey, my name's Bob, and I go, hi, my name's Tom, and I will probably say, boy, I have an uncle named Bob, and he's one of my favorite uncles. And that does two things. It tells that other person he actually heard my name, and it also tells me that when I see him again, my mind is going to think of my Uncle Bob, and I'm probably going to remember his name.
That's great advice. That is actually really insightful, because it's one of those things that I have to do because I travel so much. I give a lot of talks. I'm meeting a lot of new people. I find myself being like, what does this person want from me? Or how is this going to go? Or how can I say something that keeps me in the position of being the speaker that was here or having something creative? But you're 100% right. Just remembering their name is 100 times better than whatever creative thing I'm going to come up with. Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you're interested in the subjects that we're talking about or the idea of how do you get better at communications, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. There, listeners like you can meet other listeners from all over the world. You can put up talks that you've given to ask for feedback and ways to improve, and you can even take courses that'll help you become a tangibly better communicator. That's the Articulate Ventures Network with the link below.